I'm John Ahrens, headmaster of Augustine Christian Academy. A few weeks ago, I was blessed with the opportunity to interview Kirk Post, one of the founders of our school. As we round the corner into our 25th years of school, we decided it was important to revisit who we are and what sets us apart as a school here in Tulsa. We hope you enjoy this video. So we want to start first of all by thanking you for coming and joining us. So, having been a part of other Christian schools in Tulsa, there we go.
Oh, there you are.
You were first teaching here in Tulsa at other Christian schools. So talk a little bit about that. But then, why then did you decide to join with others to come up with this radical new idea for a school here in Tulsa?
Well, that's good. I'll keep the other part as brief as I can, but I had taught at Tulsa Christian schools for years. Before that at Tulsa Christian Academy, and in both those places I taught with someone named Judith Heaton at the time, and she later became Judy Stewart as she was married. And I had a great respect for her. She was a great teacher, had the ability to help students understand huge volumes of material, and not just memorize them, but really understand what they were about. I had great respect for her and her work. And then later I taught at yet another Christian school in Broken Arrow. But I was a little dissatisfied with some things. Part of the situation in many Christian schools is that they decided that back in the 60s, when the Supreme Court had judged that posting the Ten Commandments was against the Constitution, and that having organized prayer in schools was against the Constitution. In a radical shift, that people reacted to that. And so Christian schools began to spring up all over the place. But often they were progressive modern schools with Bible stuff back in, or with prayer added. And they didn't look an awful lot different from some of the public schools that were beginning to teach a whole different worldview. And so I was a little frustrated with that, but I met once with Judith, who said, "Kirk, there's a book you have to read." And she introduced me to Douglas Wilson's book, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. And it described classical education. And as we talked, I said, that's the kinds of things that I had pushed for all through my education, and that she had done as well. And she said, we need a school in Tulsa like that. But that's not easy to do. Now, one of the strange things about me is that I don't know I can't do certain things. I just figure you just do something because you have an idea. Other people are much more practical, and they'll say, that takes money, it takes time, and it takes support. I figured those things out along the way. So we decided we would begin to meet with people and see if other people had the same interest in a classical school, and we haven't really talked about how that's different. But we thought we would start one in maybe about a year and a half, 2 years. But several parents wanted one so badly that we decided now was the time. And so we both left our positions and decided to start a school. And we found a third teacher, Mrs. Loretta Miller, who we taught with, who was also an excellent teacher, who said, I want to join you. That's the kind of school I want to be in. And we said, okay, we're going to start one. And we printed flyers, started handing them out. We had a $500 donation. Woo-hoo. And Mrs. Miller brought her grandmother's kitchen table, and we rented space from what was Gracemont Baptist Church, and then we waited to see if anyone would enroll. It's kind of nice to have students in a school, and sure enough, the first enrollment came, and we were very excited. And we had 19 students that first year, grades 7 through 10. And we taught everything, all of the classes. And we had one phone on a long cord, and we would put it in different classrooms and take turns answering the phone. And when it was break time, we would roll out a cart and we would sell food to the kids at break time. Because we were in the church, every Monday morning we tore everything out of storage and set up the classrooms. And every Friday afternoon we tore everything down and restored it. And we had a fabulous year. And God taught us so much. And the next year we doubled in enrollment. And the next year after that we doubled again, and then we were in trouble. because we didn't have enough space. So that's a whole long story. But why did we start another Christian school? Again, because we wanted one that was founded on some different ideas. G.K. Chesterton, anyone know who that is? Oh, yeah. Said that education is simply the soul of a society being passed on to the next generation. And if that's true, what is the soul of our culture? And we felt that the soul of our culture that made our country what it is was being lost, was being traded for a counterfeit. And that if we were not careful, our students would never understand that, and that whole soul would be lost. And so we needed to have a school that understood its purpose in teaching students to understand, why am I here? What is it that God wants me to know and to do? And to prepare them for that purpose. And looking at education, too often people say, well, the purpose of education is a good job. And that's nice. Or the purpose of education at this level is to get into college so you can get a job. But isn't life much more than that? Aren't we as Christians called to make God known to the world? And to show a world that is very confused and lost in darkness, that there is truth and goodness, and that we need to show them that. And so we looked at classical education because it doesn't say, boom, here's just some things you have to memorize and know. But instead it says, look back in time. Look at how people have thought about life. What does God say life is about? What have people said about that from times well before us? What has stood the test of time? And what is it that God would have us know from that so we can handle our time here and now? And so we realized that part of classical education is learning not just how to read, but the value of what you read. Too often I think people are taught to read, but they don't know what to do with what they read. And they believe anything they read. It isn't just to learn how to cipher, as they used to say on the Beverly Hillbillies show, to make work numbers work, but to instead say, what do those numbers tell me? To be able to look at a balance sheet and say, what does that mean about the health of this business? To look at a chart or a graph and say, is that telling me what they think it tells me? What's the truth behind it? To be able to write and to speak well, but to know that I have an important message to communicate. I am to make God known. How can I do that most effectively? And what kind of education would do that? And we felt that classical education does exactly that, because it's designed to teach students to think, to read well, to communicate well, to understand what has been said before us, so that we are not looking at every idea as if it's fresh and new, because they're not. There's a movie, and I'm not pressuring this movie, but I like one part. It's called Tombstone. Has anybody ever seen that movie? Okay. I love this one scene in the bar, of course, when Doc Holliday is confronted by the member of the other gang. I think he's Johnny Ringo. And they're staring at each other off as gunmen. And there's some bragging going on. And Doc Holliday says, "In Reno Veritas," which is Latin, and I'm laughing when I see that. That's the old Latin phrase meaning there's truth in wine. Meaning that sometimes when you drink too much, you start saying things that you wouldn't say otherwise. But the funny thing is that Johnny Ringo throws another Latin phrase back at him. And the two of them have an argument in Latin that is not translated in the movie. And I'm sitting there going, okay, that's cool. And at one point, Doc Holliday turns to this young lady and he says, "Darling, this is an educated man." Why is he educated? Because he knows well beyond just the gunfights of the West. He understands the learning that had been a part of the culture from times well before him. So then, because he's not winning the argument with his intellect, he pulls out his gun and he starts doing the twirling to show how fast he is with the gun. And I'm sorry, but I love Doc Holliday's response. He has a little tin cup he's been drinking out of. So he spins the cup in the same way like the gun. And he diffuses it so that everyone laughs. And that tense moment that could have ended in a gunfight ends in laughter instead. And to me, that's a part of classical education. I can address anyone on any level and know what is necessary in that conversation to bring about the truth and to accomplish what God wants me to accomplish. The Apostle Paul stood on Mars Hill, and he's speaking to these Greeks, and they have that, do you remember that? They have that altar to the unknown God. And he says, there we go. I'm going to tell you about this unknown God. And we read Paul's beautiful persuasiveness. But what we don't get from the English is that Paul is actually quoting Greek poets and playwrights. He knew their culture, so he could speak to them in their language. Part of a classical education is being able to speak to anyone on any level, because we have a message to share. And that was what we wanted to produce, a school where students didn't only learn how to run a table saw or how to handle one particular skill, but instead could learn anything because they know what it means to learn, but more than that, they know why God would have them learn different things.
You challenged them richly also because you made sure that we were starting to teach Latin.
We did.
That other schools didn't teach that. We taught them logic. And can you go into the why behind those two specifically?
Well, both of those were part of classical education. Everyone who was educated spoke Latin, and that became the universal language. So that's why it's still in law and it's still in science, because anyone who was learned knew those languages. But it's also true that 60% of our English vocabulary comes from the Latin. So it's great for English attack skills as well. But also, language is a very concise language. And the more you study that, the more you learn that. So a lot of our mottos are in Latin, are they not? Right? So how many of us pick out a dollar bill and we see Novus Ordo Seclorum or E Pluribus Unum, and we think, what does that mean? I don't know. It means anyone who spends this is stupid. Oh, no, we don't know. We don't know what it says. And so we ignore that. But it's so much in our culture. And so again, that's that transfer of culture over, so that we understand that part of it. And logic is simply knowing how to reason correctly and well. Today, we don't like to do that. So we say, well, you're just being a hate monger if we argue with someone. Well, no. Traditionally, arguing meant you throw your ideas on the table and I throw mine there, and we mix them all up and we learn from each other. And we might change. We might not. But at least we've listened to what each other has to say. Now it's my opinion, don't contradict me. Well, how do we learn anything from that? So yeah, we wanted our students to know that as well.
You took also traditions from the European boarding schools.
We did.
One being as the school grew and as you had a larger secondary school, you chose to form the 4 Royal Houses. Can you talk a little bit about their origin here and also traditionally, and a little bit about why you opted to go that route here?
Sure. We knew we were growing, and so we had a family meeting with our students. And we asked them how they felt about that, because we had such a close-knit group. And one of their concerns is that when we grew, that they would lose that closeness. They would lose that kind of fellowship that allowed them to feel like they belonged to a small group. And so we took that to heart, and as we moved to this building, and we were more separated than we had been before, we thought maybe we need smaller groups. And we did look at European schools where students actually lived in their school, because some of ours would like to have done that. That's when we started the phrase, please go home so I can miss you. But in those schools, you lived in a house, and your house was not just a place where you stayed, but that was a group where you belonged. And often houses competed with each other, and they sharpened each other. The idea was to encourage something more, but that sense of competition also helped students try to better themselves. So Winston Churchill was a member of Powerhouse when he was growing up in school. It was very standard. Harry Potter had come out at that point, and of course Rowling just fashioned that after the schools of Europe. Everybody thought she invented houses. She didn't. So we went back to actual traditional names, mascots, but we did more than that. We looked at the colors, and we looked at traditional heraldry. And heraldry was the way that you would fashion your banners and your coat of arms, and everything on there had a symbolic meaning. And so we decided for each house, these were the symbols of that house, the character traits that house would honor above others, and then what biblical verses would be part of that. So even the type of use of what kind of border was drawn from traditional heraldry, because we wanted them to understand that was part of our roots. And so then that was developed in the houses. Our hope was then they would take these things, and whenever they would do decorations, they would follow their symbols. Unfortunately, sometimes that gets lost, and it's like other traditions where people don't know why they do what they do. They just do it. But each of those had a definite meaning. So when we went into the rank system, then we started putting those in the way you know them and know why we do what we do.
Now, I think that most of these students would agree that they may know their own reasons for, say, Dragon House, but does Dragon know the reasons for Griffin, Falcon, and so on? How do we teach that, the reason behind the traditions of our school?
That's a good challenge, I think. And I think that'd be great for the houses to do. Maybe they would have a day where a house would share with the other houses, this is what our house is all about. And we would come to appreciate that. One of the sayings that became very strong early on was 4 royal houses, but one eternal king, that we're all part of that kingdom of Christ. And so even though we would compete with each other in sports and in academics in these areas, we're still one school. And that ability to appreciate each other, we wanted to make sure that happened. One of the ways we did that was with the king and queen. We started saying the king and queen were not simply a couple of people who were honored at winter court, but instead that they served the rest of the year, and part of their duty was to try to find ways to build unity among the houses. And to do that, they were then members of every house after that. So at winter court, then they would be given tribute from each house, welcoming them into that. So they became symbols of that unity.
It's coming up next month, right? Yeah, that'll be fun. So Augustine Christian Academy, we were originally St. Augustine Academy.
We were.
And tell us a little bit about the choice of that name, the history behind that, and what it should mean to us today.
Well, that came primarily from St. Judas Stewart. Her brother, John Heaton, was an Anglican minister on the East Coast and part of the East Coast Consortium of classical schools. And so he came to advise us and give us some direction. And as we were looking at names, we began to research St. Augustine of Hippo, the Bishop of Hippo, who, when Rome was falling, had Christians in his group saying, what's going on? What is God doing? Why is our whole culture falling apart? And so they started citadels of learning that were safe places where whole families could come and learn their history and learn basic logic and scripture. And they planted gardens. And so he actually created what became the basis for classical education in Europe after that. So he said, this is a great person to name the school after because this was the beginning of classical education in Europe. So we liked that idea. But, you know, I was a Baptist, and so it was like, oh, this saint business, we're not really big on saints. But it challenged me to look at how many churches use the word saint and don't mean it necessarily in a strictly Roman Church canonization meaning. And so I accepted that. And we started our school, the St. Augustine Academy. But then for years, people would confuse us with many of the fine Catholic schools that were in town. I remember one week a bakery brought us a free Happy Catholic School Week cake. And we thanked them, and it was good. Baptists can eat Catholic cake, and it works out just fine. It's not enough fun. But we also had some Catholic students who came to our school. At one point, because they were transferring to another Catholic school, a nun who was the head of that school came to our school to meet with us. She wanted to make sure that she understood where her students were going. And so there were times when we were confused with that. And so one of our administrators, Dr. Ehrlich, decided he wanted to change the name of the school to Augustine Christian Academy just so that we wouldn't be confused with some other schools, and they did that. But others didn't like that. Some of our older students still call it St. Augustine because that's who we were.
As do the banks and
Yes.
a lot of other people.
Yes.
But you brought up a good point. You mentioned that you were a Baptist.
Mhm.
Judy was a Presbyterian.
With Anglican leanings.
Okay. And we also had some Catholics who.
Yes.
So we
And
are
Loretta was a Nazarene. So very, very broad.
multi-denomination. Can you talk about why you wanted to broaden it and make it open to all and many various and sundry denominations?
Well, because we had agreed on the need of the school, and several of us were from different denominations, we understood what it meant to disagree on some points, but to agree on what was essential. And we felt that the work that needed to be done was too important to separate by those denominations. And that if we were going to survive as a school, we needed to be able to appeal to the families at large. And not say, listen, you're not in the same church I am, so that you don't have any place here. That we could come together and really appreciate what we're doing, even while we disagree on some points. And we saw that even our first year. We had a young man who was very strongly Calvinistic, and another one who was more strongly Armenian. And they would have very serious arguments about predestination. And they were fine. They got heated sometimes. And I would remind them that the church has been arguing that for 2,000 years, and we were not going to solve it at lunch. But over the time period, they came to realize why the other person held the position they did. And they became extremely close friends. They still disagreed on the point, but they felt that they appreciated each other's dedication to God. And they appreciated the fact that each one was looking at a different aspect of the character of God and loving that character. And we felt that's what we need to do as a school. And there is an old phrase that is attributed to St. Augustine, but I don't think he actually said it. But at any rate, it's good. In things essential, unity. In things non-essential, liberty. And in all things, charity. That we will love each other in all things. But we'll be unified in things that are essential. So we developed a school statement of faith. And we've always said, if you are okay with the statement of faith, you're okay here.
Yes.
And then we'll disagree on the other points.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
It doesn't have to turn into this horrible argument stuff that's going on today.
Not like that. But the fun arguments are really okay. Because they teach us something. I know, can I say that?
Please.
Without offending someone. Judy was from a tradition of infant baptism. And I'm from a tradition of adult baptism. And we would argue that out. And it was fascinating because I felt some of my arguments, I had built a straw man on some of hers. And when I was able to actually hear where she stood on Scripture, I understood more. I still don't agree, but I understood it more. And I understood this is a person who studies the Word of God too. And so it strengthened me, I think, in my appreciation.
But
So
you
I
want
like
to
that.
break it down logically as to.
Absolutely.
And that was something that we can all benefit from here.
I believe we can.
But we're getting ready to go this week into our annual roundtable. It's a little later than usual.
Mhm.
Can you talk about, by the way, we have applications at the end. You want to get those so you can finish filling those out. We only had 30 turned in so far, so a few of you need to do that. But why roundtable? Because I understand that's a tradition that's been long-standing here
Oh,
in
yes.
Boston. And how did the early students respond to that?
Well, of course, it was based on the old Arthurian legend of a round table with no head. So everyone had equal footing. And so we had one right off the bat when we started the school. And we went to New Life Ranch and we played and we had a good time. But we also had the round table where we discussed what was really essential about who we were and what we believed. And everyone could speak, no matter your age. And we sat in one round circle. It was very nice. It was a time of reaffirming for us who we were. And so then we did it again. And each time we grew, we would just expand the circle. One year we decided, no, we're not going to go do that. We'll just do some things here. And it was a horrible mistake. Everyone missed that, and we said wrong. So we went back to doing it. Eventually we had to do concentric circles because we were just too large. But it has always been an uplifting time spiritually, and one where we came to appreciate each other, I think. So that tradition, the thing about traditions is that if you know why you do them, they're very important to hold on to. I love the fact that occasionally senior classes say, we want to start a new tradition. But I like to say, if every senior class starts a new tradition, it's not a tradition. You have to repeat it before it's a tradition. And there's nothing wrong with new traditions. It's just that at some point you have to appreciate what came before. So,
well, you've also expanded that. You formed a new tradition a while back called the New Order of Augustine.
we did.
Can you talk a little bit about the origin of that and what it means to you as well as to those who are members?
We had alumni who would come back and visit the school often and check up on us. The school had meant something to them, and it made a difference in their lives. And we loved it when they came back to visit. But we realized that when they came back to check up on us, part of what they're saying is, are you staying by the stuff? Are you holding the traditions? Are you keeping the school in a way, even as it grows and changes, that essentially maintains that purpose? And we liked that accountability. And so we decided to form an organization, an alumni group, whose main purpose would be to pray for the school so it does not give up its purpose, and then to actually come and ask the tough questions, to be challenged to keep us on course. Because there are many institutions that are founded for one purpose and they stray from that. A few of you today would recognize Harvard as the place established as a training ground for Christians. Its motto is Veritas, truth. And they taught that the Word of God is truth. That's not really that common in Harvard today. Every institution can fall from its original purpose. We don't want to do that. So we set that up. But we decided that you are not automatically part of that you had to want to take on that responsibility and be willing to come back and ask us the tough questions. And I've had alumni do that. They would sit in my office and say, Mr. Post, we're worried about this. Or we've heard rumors of that. And they would ask me those questions, and I needed that. And I think as a school we need that. Paul talks in Hebrews about a great cloud of witnesses who are standing there as we run the race for Christ, cheering us on. And I see the alumni in the New Order of Augustine that way. That they're standing there cheering us on. Do what is right. Stand for Christ. You don't have to be like everybody else. They like that about the school, and they want to keep it that way. So we started that. And now there's what? 150, 160?
I think we're pushing into the 160 mark. New Order. Now,
That's a lot of swords.
It is a lot of swords that we purchased along the way. And we're excited to do it again. Now, one of the things, though, that we're considered a kind of quirky school.
We are.
A little bit unique in the way we do things. And I think that that's important for us to recognize that we are set apart and we do things for a reason.
Yep.
We're about to hit the 25-year mark. That's next year for us. And I think that that's a huge mile marker. And congratulations on that. But what do you see our school becoming over the next 25 years?
That's big. First of all, being quirky, that's a good thing. If you're worried about being peculiar and quirky, this is the wrong place to be. Anyone can be like everybody around them. Right? We determined we didn't care what everybody else did. Even in looking at what a classical school should be, we found out they didn't all agree on that. And we had to decide who we were. And so we would do some strange things sometimes. But you know what? We enjoyed it. It gave us that foundation that you don't have to be like everyone else to be right. In fact, the old saying, and I love this, what is popular is not always right, and what is right is not always popular. Right? We believe that. And so if it makes us a little different, I don't care. It's often the different people of the world who make a difference in the world because they dare to stand out and be bold and to do something different. And part of what ACA has been about is being willing to find a new way to do something, to do it different. When we could not find a school where we could participate in their traditional sports, we wanted to do soccer and volleyball. And they said, well, yeah, you have to have a guys soccer team, you have to have you have to have a girls volleyball team. We said, well, we have girls that like to play soccer and we have guys that like to play volleyball. And they said, no. Guys play soccer, girls play volleyball. I mean, I didn't know God wrote that. It was like the 11th commandment. So we said, oh, okay. And we started our own league. We said there have to be other small schools that want to do this. So we formed what we call the Soccer Fellowship. Found 3 other schools like that. They said, really, we can play. And we'd go on Saturdays. We had 2 fields. And everybody would play, everybody else in soccer and in volleyball. And we would grill hamburgers. And we had a great time. And it was really about having a good time. And it grew. Then we moved here and we didn't have fields. So we said we need a new game. So we created Grow. Why not? Because you don't make up your own game. Why not? Do you know who Nesbitt was? No. He worked in a little Christian college. He said, you know, we need a non-contact game that you can play in the winter indoors. So he took some baskets and he hung them up on either end of the gym and said, let's have a game where you try to throw the ball into the basket. And what did he invent? But you can't invent your own game. Right. So we did. Well, nobody else plays. Who cares? We do. And actually, there are other schools that do now. It's okay. But that's part of the secret. And I think I don't want us to lose that. I don't want us to say, well, we need to become like other schools. Israel was like that, weren't they? They'd say, well, the other nations have a king. Well, the other nations get to do this. And God kept saying, you're not other nations. I want you to be different. So don't be afraid to be different. Come up with new things, but appreciate who we are. I would like to see us academically grow. But I have a challenge. Everyone doesn't learn in the same way or as well as everybody else. We all have our own challenges. Some of us are physically challenged. Some of us are not terribly coordinated. I would trip over my own feet. I like to play games, but I was not as coordinated. So is there a place for me at ACA? Some students struggle academically. Is there a way to help them gain a rigorous education, but to have them gain as well that spiritual peculiarity? Can we make a place for people here who are a little different? I want to see us, we were never concerned with being a big school. There's a school in town, a Christian school, that when it started said, we will be the biggest Christian school in town and we will absorb all the other Christian schools. Sounds like the board to me. We were never interested in that. We wanted to be who God wanted us to be and appreciate others in the work as well. So, who should we be? I love it when students come up with ideas for the school. Some of the greatest things we do here come from the minds of our students. I still have my incubator on my desk. Anybody ever see my incubator? No? I have to ask about my incubator. But I have students come and share ideas, and we think about them. And sometimes they become traditions. They become new things here for school. But that comes from us determined to know what it is that we have to do and to do it to the best of our ability. This country will not remain free unless we understand what makes it so. I wrote it down because I didn't want to mess up with it. But there's a great quote that my students know from Thomas Jefferson, right? He said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And C.S. Lewis says that education without values, even though it may have some importance, will be creating clever devils. And I think our country is full of clever devils who don't understand the purpose of life. So I would challenge us to know the purpose for our existence as Christians, to make that a priority, and to be prepared to make God known in a world that is really lost.
And that would define our why as Christians and as human beings, because we're created in God's image, and we are to give back and to honor that in our life, in what we do.
Sometimes some of the work we make students do here is designed to build their ability to think and to reason logically. And it's exercises for the brain. Sometimes I tell my students in geometry, this is a wax on, wax off moment. See, culturally, we know what that means. That sometimes we're asked to do something we have no idea why, but there's a purpose later on. And if nothing else, it's that ability to think clearly. And, so that's what
much of our education is foundational. We don't realize when we're learning it, or we're having to plod through the learning period, what we will eventually gain from that, what we'll be able to do. We have many students that go on into every career imaginable, and they do it with excellence. And sometimes we can actually claim that we played a part in it. Sometimes they come to us with incredible talents already that we're able to build upon. If you could share, we have a few more minutes here before we have some student questions, but if you could share some of the memories over these last 25 years that stand out to you, things, exciting things that to you, I'm sorry if I'm catching you off guard, but that might mean something to the students.
Oh, there's so many. There's just times when students shine in wonderful ways, and we get the opportunity to see that. And teachers could share moments like that, I'm sure. But I remember one from an early beginning that to me is important because it's a part of the character of ACA. And I've shared this before, but we had a young man who was smaller in stature and obnoxious. Extremely obnoxious. And a former chairman of our board was a student at our school at this point. I won't say his name. But he was probably one of the most patient and loving and kind students we had. But this young man liked to walk up behind the backs of the big guys and thump them in the back just to annoy them. Just to get their goat. He wanted their attention. And he didn't know the right way to do it. And so even this very kind young man said to me at one point, Mr. Post, can we take him outside and beat him up just once? It's all it would take. Just once. And the young man was indeed very annoying, and I have to confess that I had to think for a second before I said, no. Yeah. But we were doing winter court, and we were cutting out branches and trying to attach them on bases and paint them white and decorate them like little trees. And our guys, as talented as they were, could not make those trees stand up. And this young man was being typical. He said, "You're doing it wrong. You're never going to make it stand that way. That's not how you do it." They were so mad. He wasn't doing it. He was just telling them they were doing it wrong. So finally they said, "Well, show us then." He said, "Okay." And he did. And it worked. And they were like, "Whoa, he can do something." See, what happened is that their evaluation of him changed when he had an opportunity to shine. And isn't that what should happen here? Is you have an opportunity to shine. To say, this is what makes me part of what God's doing here. And we need to look for that in each other. And encourage that in each other. It's one of the reasons we often do things ourselves here. It's why we used to make Winter Court the way it was. Because in that, we had an opportunity to put our hand to the plow and try something new and different. And it gives everybody an opportunity to shine. Yeah, we also do crazy things. Can I share one more thing? This is one of my favorites. We needed cabinets to put stuff in, right? So we bought these cabinets and they were unassembled because we had to buy things cheap. So Judy and Loretta said, "Okay, who's going to put the cabinets together?" And I said, "The students are." And they said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "No, they aren't." So I got Aaron Copland's music to Rodeo. Do you know that music? It's really cool. And we put the guys into teams. And we said, "We're having an old-fashioned barn race and everybody dressed Western. And the first one to get their cabinet together wins the prize." And we put the music on. And guess what happened? It was fantastic. "No, this part goes over here." And they built these 3 cabinets in nothing flat. And it was like, "Whoa, we did this." Yeah, we did. What did we come away with? 3 cabinets. And confidence.
Character building.
And care. I can do anything. Why do you think we folded up the chairs in less than 2 minutes? Because together, we can do amazing things when we put our minds to it. And it becomes fun. Right? So be a little unusual. If you have to sweep a floor, how do you do it in a great way? If you have to clean a window, how do you do that? When we moved the library from downstairs to upstairs, I still have the video. It was hilarious. And the singing and the dancing, that's us. Whatever it takes, we're going to get it done. And that's what builds a school.